tickled to death to be here. I'm not talking about these people because I sure do miss them. And I'm going to kind of divide it up into three things. I didn't know what my crowd was going to be like tonight. I didn't know if there were going to be a lot of people here who knew Doc and knew Abie and knew Jerry. And so I just didn't know for sure what direction to go. So I've kind of busted it up into three parts. I'm going to talk about the Statums first, because I knew them very, very well. And then I'm going to talk about the Pairs. And then I'm going to talk about Jerry and Diane and Linda Sue and I. And I'm going to give you a little history first on the Statum and the Stinnett family. Miss Statum's maiden name was Stinnett. And that family, it's amazing how far they trace their roots back. And the Stinnett family came to the United States in 1733. In Maryland, they were French Huguenots. And then they came to Texas after the Civil War in 1865. And Abie was born in 1897. And Martha was born in 1902. And they got married in 1927. And they had two children, Eudine and Linda Sue. Eudine was born in 1930, and Linda Sue was born in 1938. Eudine married a man from Louisville that was named Grover McMurray in 1948, and she had two sons and two daughters. And Linda Sue and I got married July the 2nd, 1960, and we had two sons. Barry, who passed away about 4 months ago, and my son Brett, who is with me now and helping me after Linda Sue passed away just about 12 weeks ago, March 22nd. They're the Statums. That was the day they got married.
Look how happy
They were born and raised between Weatherford and Springtown in a little bitty place that's just barely there. Like a lot of those little towns, all that's left is a church and a cemetery. And but the house was there, and we used to go out there and visit. And it was fun because they had some acreage, and they had a gas well on there. Got a little money out of the gas well, but it was at Carter, a little town by the name of Carter. And there they are a little later. And there's a picture of Linda Sue right there, and there's Eudine right there, and you'll see another picture of that. And y'all should have got your gas at Abie's, because you'll see a picture of the filling station in a minute and see the price of gas, and it was 14 cents a gallon. So you could have saved 3 cents. There's Abie with Linda Sue when she's probably about 13, maybe 14. You may recognize some of you old timers, and I didn't have their names because their names weren't on the back of this picture. But Abie loved to go deer hunting. And I don't know if he liked hunting the deer or all the other things that went on when they were down there, but they went every year, and they had a pretty good haul this year. There's 4 bucks right there, and there's Abie right there. What?
I said, you got to admire somebody that deer hunts in a bow tie.
That's true. some of their friends. There's Linda Sue on the bicycle, and I didn't have their names on that one either. Probably Lauren Chastain was probably one of them because they was one of her best friends. There she is. She's probably 12 right there. And that's Mrs. Abie's mother. That's Abie's mother right there. Miss Statum had a sister. This is the youngest sister. And she came to Grapevine a lot. She was a teacher at Midwestern. I mean, not at Midwestern. She went to Midwestern, and they didn't have a lot of money, and she's the only one that went to college, but she got her degree from Midwestern, and she paid her way to college by taking care of the president of the college's 2 kids. She babysat with them. When she wasn't in class, she was babysitting, and she made enough money to do that to pay her way through college. But she ended up in Wichita Falls. That's her husband there. And they came to Grapevine a lot. And we went up there a lot too, and to Wichita Falls. And she taught in the Wichita Falls school system for 40 years. And she was a history teacher, and she never had any children. But they were really, really close. She was real close to her brothers. Abie, on the other hand, not so much with his family. And I didn't really find out too much about Abie's family. And Sue always said, I don't think you want to dig anywhere to find out about him either. But he was a wonderful individual. He was really a wonderful individual, Abie was. And I'll talk to him a little bit later. That's the picture of Hattie when she was at Midwestern, but became a teacher, and that's the sister. That's my son that's sitting on the front row with them over on their house on Valla Vista. There's the Gulf Station. And Larry, he was showing me a while ago, I had seen it before, but right there, if you pull that picture out, it says 14 cents a gallon. The Statums lived, it had to have been here a long time ago to know this, but they were next to Wilhoit's. As you work down toward the station, there were some houses, 2-story houses right there. There were 3 of them, maybe 4 of them. And they lived in one of them, the closest one to the station. And that they were there. They were probably built in the 20s, maybe even in the teens, because that was right next to downtown, of course. And Mr. Thomas owned the house. He also owned the service station. And it was torn down when Phil Parker's dad built the furniture store. The furniture store there, he took several of those houses out to build the furniture store. But that's where they lived.
What strikes me about that photograph is how tall the pumps are.
Yeah.
And the structure had to have been built to accommodate them.
Yeah. It was really a small station, but once you got inside, he had a lot of stock and everything, and there was a rack over here on the right side, and like we mentioned a while ago, it was a place to go for men, especially, the farmers. If it was raining or something like that, they couldn't go to work or something like that. Abie's Station was one of the places they went. And they played dominoes, and they played checkers, and they played dominoes, and they played checkers, and they played dominoes, and they played checkers. And I used to try to play Abie and checkers and dominoes, and he would have me beat after 3 moves. And the same way with dominoes. We were playing 42 or whatever it was. They just played all the time. And so it was and they also he had a little room back there in the back called the boiler room. And I don't know what it was back there, but they made quite a few visits back there. And you'd see a lot of Pearl and Lone Star cans around there. And I know when I used to drink a few beers myself after I got to be an adult. And when I would come to Abie's house, he would always have Pearl. And I just thought Pearl was the worst beer in the world, But and maybe that's the reason he had it there, so I wouldn't drink any of it. So, and also, a lot of you will not know this, but right behind the station back here on this side, there was a little building, and it was a lunchroom. And she had a little lunchroom there. And I don't know how long, I don't think it was very long, maybe for 3 years. But she served lunch. She had sandwiches and probably some kind of fries and tapioca pudding. I mean, because she had all these bowls. I always wondered, and before I knew that she had this little place there, we had all these little pudding bowls in the house. She had 50 or 60 of them in different places, And of course, she also made wonderful tapioca pudding. So, but she had that station that little restaurant there for 3 or 4 years. Yeah, hamburgers. That's what I was trying to think of a while ago. A lot of people really, and she could really cook a good hamburger too. Okay, it's down, as you go down Main Street, headed south, after you pass Wilhoit's, there on the right, it's that next block. And that, it's been several things since she sold it. Right now, it's one part of the building. This part over here is the winery, and the part over here is, Outfits. And so it's on the right-hand side of the street. And I may skip around a little bit on some things as I'm talking, as things pop into my mind. But slightly changed, hadn't it? That's the First Baptist Church. And we drove by there this afternoon. It goes on forever over there. And a good friend of mine growing up lived right next door, and Tommy was just two houses down from it. But that's the I don't know what date that was, but it was way back there. And I don't know if they bulldozed it down and built another one or whatever happened to it, but that was in the pictures, and it was labeled. That's a better picture of Eugene. That's Linda Sue. That's my youngest son, and that's Brett. I was going to tell you something about. Abie had a lot of teenagers that worked for him at the service station. He liked to employ kids, especially in the summertime, but a lot of times on Saturday too. And that's where a lot of the teenagers would go to wash their cars. And he had a vacuum and to clean their cars up so they could tool around town. And Hot Dog Howard and Judson Long and Freddie Cates and others all liked to hang out there with Abie. And Abie was just a fun guy to be around. And Larry Banks, who was in our class and graduated with us, was an archaeologist. And he worked for the Smithsonian Institute, but he worked for Abie almost every Saturday, and a lot in the summer. And I'm not kidding you, Abie was so much fun to be around. He was telling stories and things were going on all the time. And Larry has told me so many things about. And I'll tell you one that a woman came into the service station, and That was full service, of course. You went to the car and you cleaned the windshield, you checked the oil, checked the radiator, you did all that stuff. But Larry said when I looked into the car, she had 2 kids in there. And there was trash all over the car. It was just full of trash. And he didn't get in there to do anything to clean it out. But she finally said something to him. She said, "Do you have a whisk broom?" That's what Larry thought she said. And he said, "No, we don't have any. We just use the air hose." And all of a sudden, she spit out of that service station, left tire marks and everything. And Abie went up to him and said, "What did you say to her?" And he said, "Well, she just asked me for a whisk broom." He said, "She didn't ask you for a whisk broom. She asked you for a restroom." And one other little story Larry had told me, and I'd heard these stories before, but he had a guy come into the station one time and ask him how to get to Roanoke. And Abie told him, "Just go down Main Street, turn to the left, just follow the highway, go right straight to it." He said, "Through Denton?" He said, "No, you won't go through Denton. You just go right straight out." "Well, I know you go through Denton." And he said, "No, you really don't. You don't go through Denton. I've been there several times. I know I have to go through Denton." He said, "You're right. You do. I'll tell you what. You go right down this street, Main Street, turn to the right, get on the highway, you go to Louisville. When you get to Louisville, you take a left, and then you go to Denton. When you get to Denton, you take that highway, and you'll see the sign that says Roanoke." So that he sent him on his way, and Larry said, "Mr. Statum, that guy's going to come back so mad he gets to Roanoke, he's going to see Grapevine's 8 miles away." He said, "I'm not worried about him. He was such a know-it-all." And so anyway, Abie was real good friends with Erman Tate that lived across the street from him. And Erman had a little farm outside of town, on the way to Roanoke, and they loved to go out there. The kids loved to go out there too. He had a pretty good sized vegetable garden, and it was a good place to play. He probably had 8-10 acres out there, and loved to go out there, and probably drink a few pearls and Lone Stars out there too. And but the amazing thing about it, and it fascinated me because I was an old history teacher when I started out, but it's the same road. That little farm is on the same road where Bonnie and Clyde killed those 2 highway patrolmen. They're right over the top of the hill right there, and then you just come down that hill, and then you just cross over the highway, and his farm was almost to the road, so it was just about a mile or two. No, it was less than a mile from where Bonnie and Clyde killed the highway patrolman.
Can you tell me what years you're talking about going from?
It was right around 1930, 31 or 32. I mean, Bonnie and Clyde were going in the 20s and everything, but I think the highway patrolman might have been 29. It was right there at the start of the Depression. Another little story was interesting, fascinating to me. Before I forget this, I know y'all know where the Faust Funeral Home is, and it's right across the street from Abie's station. Well, they had a hearse that was out there. It's still out there, but it's not where it used to be. It used to sit right in the front of the building on the grass. It was just out there. Now they've got it in a little building on the side right there, but it's a hearse from the 1800s. It's an old hearse. Beautiful, beautiful hearse. Well, Linda Sue and Sandra Tate were really good friends. In fact, they ended up being college roommates at North Texas when we first started at North Texas. And they were playing. And they went over across the street, and I think they were probably maybe 7 or 8 at the time. And they got to playing around that hearse, and they climbed into the hearse, slammed the coffin door, and they could not get it open. I mean, there was no way. Nobody's ever going to, get out of the coffin. So, there's no way to, I didn't know where the latch, if there was a latch, I didn't know where it was. But it was in the summertime. Can you imagine being in a coffin this afternoon and glass? It's all glass. And they almost died from asphyxiation, but there was some kind of a delivery man came in and was dropping something off at the funeral home, and they were pounding on the window. Pounding on the glass. And the guy went inside and got Faust, and he came out there and saved their lives. So maybe that's why I got it in a building now, so nobody can get in it. But that was a scary thing. And I was talking about another little interesting episode. I don't know if y'all remember Mr. Thomas. Mr. Thomas, who owned those houses across there, and that's where owned the service station. And but Mr. Thomas he lived to be 94, 95, 96, something like that. And I think he was actually killed in a car accident at that. But he was a wonderful tennis player. And he would go to TCU, even in his 70s, in the early 80s, and play tennis against the tennis team at TCU, and could play with them. And it was just remarkable. It was amazing to me that somebody his age could still be able to do that. But he was an interesting man too. This is just a picture of my Udine's kids. This is the oldest, and the youngest. She had 2 boys, and they'd both passed away when this was made. And this is their granddaughter. And this is one of her nephews, Miss Statums, that still lives in. He's the one who ended up with all the property in Carter, and still lives in that area. That's the youngest one that passed away. He's about 10. He didn't pass away until just a few years ago, though. And that's Hattie when she was older, with the man that was in the last picture. Probably Pearl, but it's he loved baseball. He loved baseball, and so did Miss Statum. They list every ball game. She had a little radio that was sitting on top of her refrigerator, and anytime the Fort Worth Cats or the Dallas Eagles or whoever it was playing baseball, and they were on the radio, she had it on. And she loved, we went to a number of baseball games, and you'll see another picture. I think it's the next one.
If I remember my grandfather's beer can correctly, I think that was a slip.
It did have a little maroon to it, didn't it? We went to the Astrodome the first year it was open, and I think this was at that Astrodome. It may have been at Turnpike Stadium, but he caught a foul ball, and he was so excited, and Miss Statum she kept a book. Of course, I was an old baseball coach. That's where I started. I was a history teacher and a baseball coach, but she kept everything. I mean, it was just like a professional that's an announcer at the baseball game. She kept up with the eras and who it was and what the double play was, the 4 to 3 to 7, whatever it happened to be. When she went to the baseball game, she was keeping up with everything in that scorebook, and did it every time we went to the game. And she went, we didn't go that much, but we'd go to 6 or 7 games a year. But that was the only time we went to the Astrodome. And it was the first year, and we got to see Don Drysdale pitch, and so they were really excited about that. And that's how he got his name. I don't know, none of you are old enough to know the cartoon character in the 30s, but that was a real well-known cartoon that was in the paper and in the magazines and all. And that's, I don't know who gave it to him, but that's where his nickname came from. On to the pairs. Doc was born in 1907 in Erath County, and he was a son. I didn't know this. I guess, I don't know, maybe that's why you call him Doc. But he was a son of a country doctor. And they moved to Louisville as a child, and he grew up with Jill Graham, who was born in 1906. She was in Louisville too. And they married in 1928. Lived in Louisville, Sherman, San Antonio, and then moved to Grapevine in the mid-30s. Jewel was a teacher for a short time before becoming a stay-at-home mom with 5 kids: Bill, Millie, Bob, Jerry, and Janie. There they are when they first got married. I think that was their marriage picture. A little more of a smile. This is the house out on Dallas Road. That's where they lived. It doesn't look like that anymore. In fact, when I drove in, I always drive in that way when I'm coming from Plano. And I'm trying to figure out, where is it? Where was it? Where was their house? But it was, and some of you probably can remember the Trigg grocery store. There's a Trigg's grocery store was on the other side of the street, but it was pretty close to being even with it. And we had a lot of fun out there, and I'll be talking about that when I'm talking about Jerry. But, you know, the sad thing about the Pair situation was that, you know, Janie was the last one. Miss Pair was probably 43. I think she was about 43 when Janie was born. And she was handicapped. And pretty severely handicapped, but she could, you know, not physically so much. And Miss Pair started out as a teacher. She taught for a couple of years, and maybe 3. But then she devoted all her time and energy to taking care of Janie for the rest of her life. So she was there in that house with Janie. And I was talking to some people a while ago. You know, it's kind of a shame, and Jerry realized that too. She took care of her till she was, I don't know if Miss Pair passed away or she just got where she couldn't take care of her anymore, but Janie was in her 60s. So she had taken care of her whole life. Well, when Jerry took over, they moved Janie to a place in Louisville, and she blossomed. She had a boyfriend. She would go to eat with him. She just took part in the games, all the things that were going on. And Jerry said, that's such a shame for her, for Janie, and for my mom, because she thought she was doing the right thing. And in many ways she was, but they would have both been so much better off if they would have institutionalized her, because it was the perfect place for her. And I'm sure it would have been when she was 15 rather than 63. So that was the sad part. The I'll remember that little house there. I'll come back to that in a little, something else. There's Miss Pair, Jerry, and Bob, I think. Now, that one's not labeled. There she is a little bit later on. There she is with Jerry, I believe. There's Doc. Always had that hat on. Probably even when he was fishing, he still had that railroad hat on. And now most of you know where the Doc, because it hadn't been that long ago since his garage was still there. But it was right down Main Street. If you go down Main Street across Dallas Road, all you have to do is just veer a little bit to the right and you run right through it. It was right there on that corner. He's a wonderful mechanic. That was made in March of '57. He was really into sports too, and he loved watching us play sports. And Jerry and I played them all. We're a small town, and there it is. Another little story to go with that. I probably learned to gamble by being in that garage, because I would go down there. I moved to Grapevine from Dallas. I moved out here in 1953 and started the 7th grade. And Jerry and I became pretty good friends real soon. I lived in Colleyville, but after school started, we got to be friends. And when I talk about him, I'll go into that more. But anyway, I would always go down to Doc's and hang out with Jerry a little bit on Saturday, because he's working every Saturday. He'd work down there every Saturday because he's making some money, and also in the summertime. But one of the things that we did, every time I went down there, they always played a game, and whoever was there, and they liked to hang out there too. They didn't, they weren't all at Abie Station. There were some of them down there at Doc's too. And but anyway, down there we were drinking Cokes, and but he had a bottle machine, a Coke machine, and they were probably a nickel. I'm sure they were a nickel, and they were all bottles. But what we did, whoever was there would get a Coke, and everybody would put a quarter down, and then everybody would look at the bottom of the Coke, and the one that had the bottling from the furthest away won the money. And I loved to play. I just loved to play because I couldn't wait to see where it was. Because I don't know if you remember, but when it was bottled Cokes, those little nickel bottle Cokes, every town in America almost had a bottling company that was over 10,000. So, and they all had their mark. Wherever they were made, they had the mark on there. Topeka, Kansas, Los Angeles, California, Seattle, Washington, or Sherman, Texas, and whatever. And so you pick it up. And I was always so disappointed that I'd look in Dallas, and I'd lose my quarter. But I got so excited because it might be 6 people there, so you win $1.50 or $1.75. But I don't know, I was just thinking about it when I was writing that down. I don't know if I'd ever really gambled on anything before that. And so he was responsible for me being a gambler. So, no, it was a lot of fun. Doc served on the Grapevine City Council. He was a member of the lodge for a long time. He loved to fish. He had a Lone Star boat. And the name had a real nice little name on it, the Little Jewel. And that was her name, Jewel. His wife's name was Jewel. And he loved golf, and he loved to watch athletics. They spent a lot of time with their grandsons, Gary and David. We're here to, and we were talking about, several people asked if they stayed with the Pairs much, and I said you had to, because Jerry and Diane were with us for a lot of things, so I know they were having to stay with them, and I know they enjoyed having them over there too. There's his truck with him sitting in it. Still got his hat on. Butler 9, 2520. There they are. The oldest son was older than, and I never was around him much at all. That's Bob and then Jerry. I think that's both of them, David and Gary. He doesn't have his hat on though, in the house. There's another shot of him. That's 55 right there, 1955, September 55. And he'd just been fishing, or he's getting ready to go, because he's got him on. And I think she liked to fish too. She didn't get a chance to much, but she enjoyed fishing. And I don't know which one. I don't know who he's got there. Probably Gary, because he's a little older right there, it looks like. That was just put in there. That's Linda Sue and I, and that's Diane and Jerry and Elaine Allison and her husband to be. That was just fell into the wrong place. He had a lot of stuff there too. You see all the belts and all the stuff they had. There's Janie. Probably when she's 12, 13. And I just happened to find that picture. And that was, I thought, I didn't know who was going to be here. And that's some of the classmates. Carl Morgan, Maurice Perkle, who lived right behind Doc Pear's place. That's me. That's Kelly Casey. And that's Leon Bays. And I think, I don't remember for sure, but I think we played hooky that day from school and went to the Fat Stock Show. And Jerry didn't go. And so Jerry wasn't with us, so he was the good guy that day. But the rest of us, we probably wish we would have been in that place the day after that, and after we got back to school and they figured out where we were. But that was taken at some kind of amusement thing at the Fat Stock Show. That's my mother and Miss Statum. And that's my dad, and that's my mother, and I think that's Brett right there. An interesting story we were tied together, of course, as a family, but my dad, we lived in Dallas all the time I was growing up until the 7th grade. My dad worked for the telephone company, and he was born and raised in Temple, fought in World War I, and so he was 44 when I was born, and but I don't know what it was, but he bought 6 or 7 acres of land right behind where Webb City's grocery store was in 1947. Now, Dallas Road, Webb City was that little place right there on the corner where there used to be a drive-in theater later on out there too, but it was right there on that corner, but he bought the land right back behind. And my dad was raised on a farm and made some money, especially right after World War I when he got back. They raised cotton in Temple, but he didn't want to be a farmer. He didn't want to be a farmer. And so, he loved to work in gardens and stuff. And so he had a mule, and and when we were even in Dallas, he'd plow, because a lot of people would buy a house and buy a lot next to them. And so he'd plow it for them and raise crops. So I think he still wanted to do that, but he kept it about a year or two and sold it. That was 47, 48. So we were still in Dallas. But evidently something was pulling him to Grapevine, because he was bound and determined to come. And so in 1953, we moved out to Colleyville, lived right across the street from the cemetery on Jess Hall Road, which was Jess Hall Road then. And lived out there for about 4 years. And I think the sand finally drove my mother out of there, because when the wind would blow out there, it was real sandy and everything. So we moved into town, and moved up on Bel Air. Well, Jerry lived on Bel Air. Linda Sue lived 2 blocks over from Bel Air. So that was the neighborhood that we migrated to. All right, this last little part, I want to talk about Jerry and Diane. I've talked a long time, I know. It's my mother and Linda Sue. I think you know some of those people. One of them sitting here on the second row. We all went to school together at North Texas, and became friends there, and remained friends our whole lives. Buddy Hall was also in that group. We met together for 25 years at different houses on New Year's Eve. We got together other times too, but always on New Year's Eve. And we did it for 25 years. One time it'd be at this house, the next year it'd be at another house, next year it was the other house, and the next year it was the other house. And it was always fun, and that's when Mr. and Miss Pair were taking care of Gary and David, and that's when my mom was taking care of Brett and Barry, because we'd stay up pretty late, because we'd be playing cards and so it was well into the morning before we got home. Back to that, Jerry and I really hit it off from the very beginning. Tommy had asked me to talk about Jerry and Diane a little bit, and so Jerry and I, for some reason, really hit it off from the very beginning. I had a miserable year the first year, because I moved out to Colleyville in June. I didn't know anybody, so I spent my whole time shooting at rabbits and fishing in a little pond out there for months on time. But I didn't really. I wasn't sad about it. I just didn't get a chance to meet anybody. And so, but once school started, and I was involved in sports in the 7th grade and 8th grade and so on, I met Jerry and some others too, but Jerry was the one. And we just became really good friends. And it went on for a long time. But I don't know if any of you have ever played a game called 5 Steps. Jerry and I would play for hours sometimes, play 5 Steps. And 5 Steps was a game where and we played next to that house out there. There was a big lot out there. So we had the length of a football field just about. And Jerry was always a real good kicker, punter. So what happens is you punt the ball, and if you catch it, you get to go forward 5 steps. And if you don't catch it, you got to go back 5 steps. Well, I could never beat Jerry, because Jerry was a fantastic punter. And even at North Texas, his senior year, he was 7th in the nation in punting. and he was an outstanding high school punter and an outstanding quarterback. And but he could kick the ball. But we had more fun playing 5 steps out there. And you know, everybody always complaining nowadays about the kids getting outside, getting away from the computers or whatever, and playing games. Well, that's one of the games we played, was 5 steps. And especially in the summer, after he'd get off work, things like that, we'd get out there getting ready for football to start. He was such a big influence on my life. We played everything together here. When he got a scholarship he got offered a scholarship to Texas Tech and SMU and North Texas, and we went out on a visiting trip out to Lubbock. We went out to Lubbock and to see Texas Tech, and it came a sandstorm out there, and I mean it was a bad one. And we were in the athletic dorm, and in the chow hall, going in there and eating, and it was mashed potatoes, you know, everything had sand in it. And Jerry said, "I'm not coming out here. I'm coming out here." So we ended up at North Texas, and it really worked out good for me too, because I had played pretty well, and I had a scholarship to Paris Junior College, so I was going to Paris Junior College, and I'd been there a week, and Jerry called me, and he said, "Sherman, why don't you?" I've talked to the coach here. He said, "You know, we don't have that many good running backs right here right now," and he said, "I think if you'll come up here," he said, "I think they're going to let you try out," and so it didn't take me long. I was packed and ready and gone, and to North Texas, and it worked out good. It really worked out well, and we played football together for 3 years at North Texas, and in the meantime, of course, and I'm going to skip around a little bit, but I see Vicki sitting there, and when I was in the 7th and 8th and 9th grade, Vicki and I were dating. Steadily, and I got to be really good friends with her dad. And in fact, right when I was in the 9th grade, I think it was the 9th grade, he was going to build a house. Sam was really talented as far as a carpenter is concerned, so we built their house right up next to where the high school was at that time. And he subbed out some things, like the plumbing and a few things like that, but overall, we built the whole thing. And so he was just a wonderful man. And then, the next year, his brother, who was in the building business in Fort Worth, was going to California to build houses out there. And he asked Sam to come with him. And then Sam asked me, said, "Do you want to go too?" And I'd been out to California quite a few times in other areas with my aunts, but I said, "Yeah." So I went out there with them to La Jolla, and La Jolla is one of the prettiest places in the state of California, and also one of the most expensive. And we were building houses overlooking the ocean up above La Jolla, and I remember this was 1955, I guess, and those houses that we were building were going to sell for $22,500. The house we were building was going to be sold for $22,500. And that house today would be worth at least $4 or $5 million, because it was a big house and it had a fantastic view. And La Jolla is a really neat place to live. So it was quite an experience. And then when Jerry and I stayed together when we both got married in our last year at North Texas. I lived about where the church is, and Diane and Jerry lived about where this building is. We were that far apart. I was his best man, he was my best man. And we we travel the world together playing golf and enjoying the sights. They moved away for a little while. Diane and Jerry moved to Detroit. He was with GM. He went with GM. He was a business major. And he went to Detroit, calling on dealerships. And then he got moved to Philadelphia. They didn't like Philadelphia. And but about that time, Jerry had an opportunity to buy the auto supply business down across pretty close to where the Ford house used to be. And so he bought that. He bought that and started that and ran it then for the rest of his life until he retired. And I was in Grapevine. I was in the school business, and I would come to see him and Diane. We got together all the time, going out to eat, going on vacation. He also had a place, he later got a condo in Galveston. And Diane loved Galveston. I mean, she just loved Galveston. And she'd go down there all the time. Jerry finally got a little tired of it. This was after he retired. And she loved to go to the historical houses, and we'd go down there with them. He had a really nice condo on about the 7th or 8th floor, right on the seawall, overlooking the ocean and the Gulf. And we played golf down there too. And it was, we'd go to the historical. They always had the Mardi Gras in Galveston. We'd go down there for that, and they had the historical tours, and we'd go on those. And she just really, really did love Galveston. And of course, Diane ended up teaching. She was teaching over in Irving. I think she taught for about 23 years, something like that. But then she came back and started helping Jerry in the business. And she did the books, and they were down there together. I don't know how much time she spent, she was out shopping or going to this and doing that too a lot. But anyway, she did do the books for him, and he loved having her down there. And so they were there until he sold the business. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.